Welcome back to the Builder Series at Frank's Place and part 2 of the 30,000-mile maintenance cycle on Byrdie, our new to us 1993 Toyota Motorhome. In part 1, we completed many things on our list, and in this episode, we'll be working on the front brakes and wheel bearings. So let's get to it. So I've moved on to start the next part of this maintenance cycle, which is inspecting the front brakes, repacking the front wheel bearings. So I've jacked up, got on a safety stand, and I got the wheel off. There's a little bit of a ridge here, but I gotta measure all this. So first thing is I gotta take the caliper off, inspect the pads, start looking at taking this thing apart. It's pretty heavy duty. Wonder if I'm supposed to take these. No, I don't think so. I am gonna have to study this a little bit more. Okay. All right, so I figured out what this is. This is the brake rotor that ends here. And on a normal pickup, a non-1-ton pickup, I believe that the tire mounts here. Now because this is a 1-ton dually rear wheel truck chassis, it has deep wheels. See how deep these wheels are? From here to that flange is very deep. Well, if you don't want to have to carry multiple spare tires, you want one spare tire that can go everywhere, which means you got to have a deep wheel everywhere. And so if you look at the front wheel, it's also deep, but it's put on 180 degrees from this one. So this one, the dish goes in, and on this one, it's mounted the other way. So the offset's the same, so that you have one spare tire. So what it means is that you got to bring this flange out. So I think that's what this is. I think from here, this is an adapter that allows for these deep dish dually wheels in the front. I'm wondering if the outer wheel bearing may be all the way out here. I'm gonna take this dust cap off and see what I can see. I was struggling to get this dust cap off. I sort of just carefully pounded around and I got it loose. And take the caliper loose. You got one bolt there, one bolt there. This caliper assembly is going to come off there, and then we can sort of hold it up here. You want to make sure you don't let it dangle on this brake line. So we'll undo these two bolts, get this caliper loose. We can inspect the brake pads. Then I can pull this off. We can look at the bearings. We can measure the rotor. But anyway, let's get the caliper off. I'm using a breaker bar to break these loose. I've already done it, but they're pretty tight. So I used a breaker bar, but now that I got them loosened up, then I'm gonna go ahead and finish taking them out. Okay, that's one. I'm gonna try to keep these organized in terms of which one was on the top and which one was at the bottom. And one is shorter than the other, so the bottom one is shorter. Wiggle the caliper off. Just like that. I'm gonna set it right here for now. I'm gonna go get a bungee cord so I can hold that up. There, that's pretty secure. Now, we've got these little spring things, which I think are part of the anti-squeak. At a minimum, I'm going to take them off and measure them, clean up the surfaces where they slide and re-grease them. It's got 30,000 miles. They may need to be replaced, but I got to measure them. So let's get them out of there. This is an anti-squeak pad, shim, anti-squeak shim. These actually look pretty good. These brakes may have been redone. this center crack slot is a wear slot. So if it's down past that, but you can see there's a lot left. So I'm gonna measure these now. I got the specs. Okay, this is out of the service manual, and I have the PD66. So if you measure the pad, like it says to do here, the nominal thickness is 0.382 inches. The minimum thickness is down to 1 millimeter. We've clearly got a lot more than 1 millimeter there, but I'm gonna measure the thickness of the pad and see where we're at. I've got my calipers, and now let's measure the thickness. 0.302. So these are relatively new. 0.3. 0.297. Well, clearly, those are well within the range. These do not need to be replaced. So I'm going to put these back in. The other thing we need to do is measure the rotor thickness, and that needs to be somewhere between 28 and 30 millimeters. Let's see if I can read this. 1.204. 1.204. 1.206. 1.206. Let's go see if that makes sense. Well, that makes it bigger than its nominal thickness. So it got 1.2. So those rotors are plenty good. All right, so the rotors and the brakes are fine. So we've determined the rotor's good, the brake pads are good, and that grease looks brand new. But I don't know, it turns so good. Part of me hates to mess with it, but it's got 30,000 miles and I have no way to know whether these have been repacked or not. Well, I've got it torn this far apart. I might as well repack these bearings, just to be sure. If I repack this side, I probably should repack the other side. I guess the only downside is it's just extra work that may not be necessary. Well, it's hard to say if this is the original rotor, the original Toyota rotor, or if this has been replaced. If they replaced the rotor, then they repacked the bearings. If they just put new pads on and the rotor was fine, then these may not have been repacked. I just don't have the history of the vehicle. I need it to be reliable, so I think just to be sure, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this off and repack this bearing. Which means I gotta take this off, and then I gotta take the cotter pin loose. In the manual it says you use a spring force gauge to preload the bearings. So I'm gonna try to get a feel for how much force this takes, so I can preload it about the same it is now, assuming this is correct. This is always a messy job. Wheel bearing grease is nasty. Okay, you take the star nut thing off. There's a retainer that keeps the nut, the bearing pretension nut from backing out. I probably should go put gloves on. Now, there's a washer. Now, when you get to this step, you want to be careful, particularly if you're going to try to save the, there's a seal in the back, and you want to pull straight out and not let this assembly, which is a little bit heavy, fall down and smack that seal. Otherwise, you're going to be buying a new seal, which is probably a good idea anyway, but Okay, there's the front bearing. I don't know why this isn't coming off. There can't be anything holding it on because it's a rotating assembly. I don't know what the hell is going on here. There just absolutely can't be anything holding it on. I just gotta keep after it. It'll come loose. I just gotta keep pulling. Ah, Jesus. There's another nut? No. Inner bearing, oil seal. That is really stuck. Well, I pulled and pulled and pulled on it, and it came off. So I don't really know what the issue was. Whew. It looks like the seal, I had to pull it off the seal. I'm surprised by that. I really thought, now see, that grease is a little dark, so it's probably a good thing I'm doing this. I had to pull like a son gun though. I had to pull really hard. So why didn't this bearing come off with the hub? I think the bearing is stuck on the spindle. See if I can figure out how to get that bearing off there. Perhaps water got in there and rusted it a little bit. Yeah, see, that bearing was supposed to come off. All right, well, at this point, I've done something I didn't really want to do, but I don't think I had any choice. I pried on the bearing until this bearing cage sort of came apart, and then all the roller bearings came out. And now there's a lip on the bottom race. I should be able to get the puller on, and I should be able to pull this bearing off. That's what I'm hoping. But I should be able to use that lip to pull that off. Well, at this point, I'm really at a loss for what to do. The pullers won't work because that race is tapered. It has a little tiny lip. So the jaws of the pullers won't get a purchase on that little lip to pull on it. I tried vice grips. You know, it's theoretically not supposed to be press fit. It's supposed to be a slight clearance fit, you know, or maybe a tiny interference, but it's stuck. I'm guessing water got in there and rusted it. I don't know. So I called Mary Beth. She's gonna come get me. I don't have a propane bottle for my plumber's torch. The next step is to heat it up and hope it breaks loose. Well, it's a few days later. I didn't come into the shop yesterday because I had a BBB Adventures video to edit and get that out. So it's Saturday and I'm back in the shop. I did some research on this problem we're having with this bearing race stuck to the spindle. Some of what I've read is sometimes this can happen if the bearing freezes and fails, and then this part of the bearing actually spins on the spindle. No. But this bearing was not stuck. This was a free turning bearing before I destroyed it. So I just don't think it's that. The other possible explanation is that some water's gotten in there, maybe through this seal, has got some corrosion. Yeah, there's a couple of theories on how to get this off. One is to heat this up and hope that it breaks loose. The other is to use a bearing splitter tool, which I purchased. Bearing separator. I got this at Harbor Freight. I haven't opened it yet. I'm gonna try the heat first. Successfully use heat to get that off there, then I will not open this. So that's what I'm gonna try first.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we find out if the heat worked and we finish the 30,000 mile maintenance cycle ahead of our January trip south. Thanks for watching. See you next time.